This is the Dr. Duke Show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show. I am Dr. Duke, and I'm joined today by Alex Newman. Alex, thanks for being with us.
Great to be here. Thank you, Duke.
So we have a remarkable story, I think, that really shows the contradictions in progressivism, especially when it comes to sexuality. As an English professor, I want to throw a word at you, Alex. The word is aporetic. Aporetic. It means when you have a worldview or an argument that is so internally conflicting with itself, it's almost tautological. And you see this now here in Canada. We have a Indigenous, a Native American Canadian man who transitioned, according to him anyway, to a woman. He actually had his genitals removed, and he had not a vagina, but a big gaping wound where his penis was that they call a vagina. Now, to the surprise of nobody, this Native American man who thinks he's a woman, who now has no penis, but a gaping wound between his legs, he has decided now that, you know what? The pain is excruciating. I'm not happy. What's been done to me is horrifying. I want to die. And here's where the aporetic nonsense comes in. Not only is Canada basically the ground zero for euthanasia for no reason at all, and in the whole world, really, even more than Europe, they're now denying this man the right to die. And I think you and I know why, because killing him will make it look like something's wrong with trans and trans surgeries. What are your thoughts?
I have no doubt about it, Duke. That was exactly what was going through my head as I saw this news report, because I was looking at the numbers. It was just shocking. They have killed tens of thousands of people in these medical assistance in dying, these suicides that are being helped along by the government. And this poor individual who was duped into being surgically mutilated, I mean, the guy's miserable. Obviously, suicide, in my personal opinion, should never be an option. But if the Canadian government is just willy-nilly killing people, why this poor guy can't get some help? And the reason is so obvious, is because if they killed him, they would have to then admit that, whoops, we really made his situation far worse by castrating him, removing his genitals, and constructing this fraudulent, I think they'd like to call it a neo-vagina, in the literature and in their documents. But of course, there's no such thing as a neo-vagina. It's not a vagina, as you pointed out. It's just a wound. But this would just make it so obvious for everyone that these surgical mutilations are not a benefit to anyone. And in fact, they lead to even worse outcomes. And of course, this is what we've seen over and over again. But the Canadian government is just completely out of control.
Well, and this is aporetic in a number, not just in the way we just discussed, but why in the world, in Trudeau's wokest of woke Canada, why do Indigenous people have to ask Whitey to get this kind of medical care and die? Why does an Indigenous person, why does he have to go on his hands and knees because he's suffering to Great White Father and not get what he needs? And by the way, I think it's fair to say, and tell me if you'd agree with this, if he was just a boring old white gay dude who wanted to die, he'd be dead already. Is that fair to say in Canada?
If he hadn't been castrated, almost certainly. I mean, they're killing kids now. I mean, there was a debate in the, I forget which one of the provinces in their parliament, if they should extend this down to babies who are born with problems. So, if you want to die in Canada, they will absolutely help you. But yeah, this is very interesting what you're pointing out here, that the white establishment is denying this poor Indigenous trans individual his wishes in medicine. Truly amazing.
Take a look at the video of, I guess his female name is Lois Cardinal, and let's hear what he has to say about his situation.
My name is Lois, and I am a sterilized First Nations person of Treaty 6, living on reserve in Alberta, and I am also a post-op transsexual of 14 years. We must have honest conversations about the dark side of transition. We must talk about detransitioners and their stories. And my story, from a regretful transition to medical assistance in dying, I feel like I have contributed to the genocide of my people. I am more than a statistic. I am more than the color of my skin. I am more than your idea of what a BIPOC trans person should be. Soon I will be another dead Indian, but until then, I am here to share my story.
I'm participating in your killing of Indians. Well, she wants to die, right? She wants to be killed. Then she's going to be a dead Indian, which will be their fault because they're white. And he wants to die because of what he chose to do to his body and allowed the Canadian government to do to him. And yet now notice that this whole thing becomes not let's get rid of these kinds of surgeries. Let's stop this. I mean, he does say we need to listen to the stories of detransitioners, but she makes no apology. She doesn't seem to be bothered by the fact that her warped worldview and the lie that she's been sold by Whitey, that you can simply change who you are with a couple of surgeries. What a completely crazy story that she's painting herself here exclusively as a victim, not even sexually or surgically, but again and again because she's a First Nation person and going to be one more dead Indian. There's no sympathetic figures anywhere in this story.
Yeah, it's very sad, Duke, and unfortunately these lies, this mental and spiritual poison that's being pumped out by the elites, not just in Canada, but here in the United States, across Western Europe, and even at the international level, it's absolutely sick and twisted and demented. You're right, there needs to be personal responsibility here. You know, people who are duped into this are not entirely blameless in this, and you would think that this would cause some pause and a re-examination of the worldview that produced this kind of disaster. But, you know, I do have some sympathy for this individual. One of the things that he's complaining about is that, you know, he's desperately seeking for help. He's in terrible physical pain. He's in terrible mental anguish. And one of the things that he said, he's quoted in the news report saying, is that they're more interested in my pronouns than in the fact that I'm just in this terrible physical pain. And I think one of the things that's going on here, Duke, and we've talked about this in previous episodes, is that a lot of these people are being deceived. They're being told by their doctors that, hey, you're going to feel so much better after we castrate you. You're just going to be your true self. Now, obviously, again, there's an element of personal responsibility here. You have an obligation, and we should have seen this during the last few years during the words that I can't say to avoid getting us censored. But this should be very obvious that you can't trust these doctors anymore, that you need to be asking questions. But what's happening here is these trusted authority figures, your government, your doctor in a fancy white coat, they're telling you, hey, you're going to feel great. There's really very little risk of side effects. You know, you might have a little pain, but don't worry, we can control that. And then the reality is totally different. The pain is incredible. It doesn't actually fix your underlying issues, right? Chopping off your private parts isn't going to fix the mental and spiritual issues that you're going through that caused you to think chopping off your private parts in the first place would be a good idea. So there's plenty of blame to go all around here. You're right. There's definitely a need for personal accountability. But I think the people that really need to be held responsible here are the government officials and the quote-unquote medical authorities that are lying to people and telling them that they're going to feel great, that they're going to become their true selves after they submit to these surgical mutilations. It's preposterous. It's disgraceful. And it's time for people to start asking serious questions, not just on the trans stuff, not just on the C word and the V word, but across all these issues. At this point, if the government medical industrial complex told me the sky was blue, I'd have to go to the window and actually check that out for myself. They have no credibility left.
Yeah, you know, what you said is what I was going for. Her problem is intellectual and mental. It is not physical. And for the government to treat her that way, there's where the sympathy, if there is some, lies. There's no ability in Canada to treat mental illness when it comes to gender. That's conversion therapy. We're not going to do it. So all this physical suffering now, because the government of Canada was unwilling and unable to deal with his mental issues. Now he's got mental and biological and anatomical problems and wants to die. The whole thing is just really screwy. After the break, we're going to finish this conversation. There's a few more things to say, and we have another story to show how out of control the left is when it comes to this kind of stuff. See you at the break. We're back with Alex Newman now, and we're talking about the tragic story of Lois Cardinal, a man, an Indigenous person, a Native American in Canada, who has become according to him and the state at least, a woman because he's had his penis removed. Now he has not a vagina, not a neo-vagina. He has a gaping hole between his legs. And one of the things I wanted to bring up, and I know this is unpleasant, so this is obviously not a conversation we would want to have in front of your children if you're watching at home. But same thing happened with Jazz Jennings. You may remember Jazz was a little boy who was the poster child of transitioning. He was 7, 8, 9 years old, dressed like a woman, wanted to be a woman, got puberty blockers very young. And as soon as he was old enough to do so, Jazz had his penis removed. Now, the last time we saw him about a month ago, he's grossly overweight, he's sterile, he has no pleasure in sex, and he too has one of these so-called neo-vaginas, these holes between his leg. And unless and this is true of Lois Cardinal too, unless people who get this surgery are constantly dilating themselves, literally having to put something inside of them to keep the wound from healing, the wound will close. And so consequently, they will not be what they think they are. This is how wicked this is. And of course, the penetration, the dilation of the wound, keeping it open, how is anybody surprised that isn't just terribly, terribly painful? So the irony here, the brutal irony here, Alex, is that these men want to be women. They want to experience sex as women experience it. But the closest they can come is to keep an open wound open, and there's not pleasure, there's only pain there.
Yeah, it's tragic. And this goes back to what we were just saying, Duke. All of this is based on lies. I mean, even telling these patients who are suffering, obviously, from terrible mental anguish and spiritual issues, to tell them that they can have a neo-vagina is to completely lie to them. It's to use words in a way that is inherently dishonest. You're not getting a neo-vagina. You're getting exactly what you just explained, Duke, a gaping wound between your legs. And that's all it is. I mean, it's the equivalent of a wound if I, made a big hole in my leg, right? It's just it's a festering wound that produces a lot of pain. It's not a neo-vagina. And so to lie to these poor individuals, like the one that you mentioned, Jazz, there was just another testimony in Congress. Congress was holding hearings last week on this issue, and they had this poor little girl, Chloe, who was deceived into believing that she could transition. And she's sitting there begging these members of Congress, begging the people at this panel, like, just listen to me, stop hurting these kids. You did it to me. Don't do it to any more. She's trying to beg these other parents who are thinking about, I think, chopping off their own children's private parts. This is not what your kids really need. They need actual help, not surgical mutilation. And yet the media is complicit in this. The big medical establishment is complicit in this. The big pharma establishment is complicit in this, and of course the government is complicit in this on every level, not just in Canada but even here in the United States.
Yeah, and perhaps the last point that needs to be made here is that what is absolutely astounding to me, and Canada is so far down the rabbit hole, the left is so far down the rabbit hole that no one's paying even attention to this, how cavalierly the need to die is taken as an absolute given. Look at the graph here, how the various provinces of Canada, how euthanasia, state-sponsored euthanasia, is soaring in British Columbia, up 24%, 40% higher since 2021 in Alberta, Manitoba 9%, 27% higher in Ontario, 55% higher in Quebec. This is outrageous. And the argument seems to be by Lois Cardinal that, I'm in a lot of pain. You promised death. Your promise to us as Canadian citizens is that we'll die when we want and you will do it. And that's the part of the story that may be perhaps the biggest problem that we've talked about in all of these problems since we started this program. The reality is that dying is the answer. I mean, there's no spiritual. I thought Native Americans were so deeply spiritual. Where is the spirituality? Where is the theological answer to this? We've already ruled out mental health counseling as a way to try to bring people back from the brink. It's just so cavalier. The culture of death is so radical in places like Canada and here in America too. And it's only going to get worse, isn't it, Alex?
It is, if this continues. And you know what's so terribly tragic and ironic, too, about this, Duke, is that right now Canada is in convulsions about the alleged oppression of trying to bring Christianity to the native peoples of North America. There's supposed to have been this horrible thing, this cultural imperialism that Christians came and tried to share the gospel, tried to share the Bible, tried to share the good news with the people who lived here. And this is supposed to be some terrible, horrible tragedies, this big crime that the Europeans did. How dare they tell these pagans who were committing genocide and cannibalism that, there's this Bible that talks about this God, this creator. That's evil. That's wicked. And yet at the same time, it's exactly what they're doing with this demented worldview that they are now teaching, not just to natives, but to all the people in Canada through the government indoctrination system masquerading as a school system, through the government-funded media, which is much bigger in Canada even than it is here in the United States, where they got the CBC and all this. They're doing the exact same thing that they accuse Christians of having done, and yet Christians, when they did it, and I mean, this is very clear. Go talk to a Native American Christian, and they will tell you what wonders Christianity has done for them as individuals, and also for other members of their tribes and of their nations who have come to know God through the working of missionaries. So the demented irony here is just off the charts, Duke, that this horrific cultural imperialism, telling these Indians that, it was terrible that Christians came here and shared the Bible with you, but it's great that we're going to come here and tell you to chop off your private parts so you can be your true self. That's the real crime. The irony is just insane.
And switching gears here, Alex, to give you another example and talk more about this, how this culture of death works, and how the one group of people that seems to be exempt from any of this, even including the right to die in Canada, is the transgender community. So we have a story by Wesley Smith over at the National Review, and he really deals with ethics and human bioethics a lot. So he's alerting the public to many of these stories. Well, we have an actual professional medical journal. It's called Qualitative Research in Health. And what it's arguing now, that if you're a woman and you're pregnant and you're becoming a man, you should be allowed to keep taking testosterone even while your baby is gestating. Now, this is a stunning argument, right? That you're a woman, clearly, obviously, because you're pregnant, but you want to become a man. Your right to become a man, quote unquote, is more important than the natural development of the child in your body. And you can flood your body. You ought to have the right to flood your body with dangerous testosterone while your baby is gestating because you want to become a man.
It is so sick, and and this goes actually right along with the story of the CDC putting out guidance for how men can chest feed their babies by taking a certain deadly concoction of supplements and hormones and other toxic chemicals. The disregard for the lives of children and babies. I guess we shouldn't be surprised by it. I mean, these are the people who believe that you should be able to butcher your baby right up until the time it's ready to come out, and many of them actually take it to the logical next step, which, why can't you murder your baby after he or she or they comes out of the womb, right? So I guess we shouldn't be surprised about this, Duke, but it is so tragic that we're even having to have this discussion. It makes you want to cry. And think about what this is going to do to all these babies. I mean, we all recognize it would be insane to say to a mother, well, you identify as a crack addict. Well, why don't you just keep smoking crack while you are pregnant with another individual, separate human being with God-given rights in your womb? You can just keep smoking crack because, your right to smoke crack supersedes the right of that baby to have a normal, healthy life and healthy development. That's exactly what they're doing here with this horrific example that you just gave.
Yeah, again, this is the Qualitative Research in Health journal, and here's what it says. This is unbelievable, Alex. Quote, contemporary pregnancy, in particular, has become a site of epistemic injustice through processes of medical professionals and technologies assuming power and epistemic authority over pregnancy and pregnant people, often denying or suspending the epistemic privilege, knowledge, and control that a pregnant person has over their own body and embodied pregnancy experience. That's a lot of critical race theory, Alex, basically saying the right of a woman to become a man supersedes the right of any child to be allowed to develop naturally in the womb. Unbelievable. And how many times are you going to throw the word epistemic around to make it sound like, well, gee, this is serious science we're dealing here with, Alex.
Yeah, and I shouldn't laugh. This is so tragic. And the great irony here is that you can't have a right to something that's impossible. All the testosterone in the universe is not going to come any closer to making you a man than surgically mutilating yourself or wearing, manly clothes or cutting your hair in a manly way. The reality is every cell in your body is still going to have those chromosomes clearly identifying you as a female. In fact, you've got a baby in your womb. Only females have wombs. So you can't have a right to something that is impossible. It's clearly absurd. And yet, you're right. They use this word salad to try to make it sound scientific. And that's actually what we see in the previous story that we just talked about. I was looking through some of the news articles. They try to make it sound so medical, and you got to have a medical degree to understand this very complicated stuff, like whether we should be allowed to help kill you after we mutilated you. It's just so grotesque. And I think at some point people will wake up from this and realize that we've just been living this nightmare. But in the meantime, how many babies, how many individuals like this Indigenous man up in Canada are going to be sacrificed on the altar of this madness before we come to our senses and say, no more, you people are quacks and you belong either in a padded cell or in a jail cell.
How's this for word salad? They're also arguing, as other studies have demonstrated, that asking women to protect the development of their babies, in other words, to take care of themselves for the sake of the baby, that is controlling a woman's body. And that is deeply, deeply transgressive. Here's a quote. How responsibilities for ensuring the health and well-being of embryos, fetuses, children, and families are forms of gendered precautionary labor in which safety-first approaches result in additional social control over women. And it's not just embryos and unborn babies. Having a family, having a 3 or a 5 or a 7-year-old, and being responsible for looking after the welfare of that child is now misogynist controls attempts to keep women in suffrage. It's unbelievable, Alex, what they're telling us now. Asking mothers to care for their children in any way is now a gross misogynist imposition.
Yeah, and this is just the next logical step in radical feminism. They told women that marriage was patriarchal oppression. They told women that having a stable relationship, having a family was this horrible oppression. And so they said that pregnancy was this horrible oppression. And so why are we surprised now that this is the next step in the craziness? But it's really scary, Duke, how fast this stuff is accelerating. I think people need to stop and think just for a moment. Where were we 5 years ago? Where are we today? Look how fast that happened. Where are we going to be in the next 5? A lot of people watching us, Duke, they know exactly what we're saying, but they're terrified to speak out. They're worried that maybe they're going to get fired from their job, or their local fake newspaper is going to attack them, or they're going to be investigated by the medical board. Or we all know that this is totally bonkers. How long until people get the courage to say enough is enough?
Well, according to, I'll just give you the summation from Wes Smith over at the NR, because I think this is important. He says, quote, by taking pregnant women who identify as men off testosterone during pregnancy, doctors are placing the safety of babies above the feelings of the mother. And the feelings of the mother are more important than the actual life of the child. And that's not just about testosterone. There's your argument, really bad argument. The feelings of the mother over the life of the child for abortion. And you said something powerful, Alex, and I want to end on this. Where 5 years ago, it was inconceivable that we'd be messing with pronouns, we'd be giving surgeries to children. 10 years ago, it would have been impossible to imagine that we have racialized our public school classrooms. I'm telling you right now, everybody's agape at the press, the movement towards pedophilia. 5 years from now, that will be as normal as this is now, unless something happens, because you can already see it, right? 5 years ago, here we are. Five years ago, people were angry, and still, look where we are. Right now, people are angry about all the pedophilia. 5 years from now, you're going to be on the wrong side of this, because if nothing changes, it will be as normal as this garbage.
God help us.
And that's going to wrap up the show. If you have any questions, comments, or want to support this show, simply visit drdukeshow.com. For all of us at the show and for Alex Newman, thanks, and we will see you next time.